Imagine being the face of the NFL for nearly a decade. 3 Super Bowl rings, MVP trophies, highlight plays that run on repeat every Sunday. That's the world Patrick Mahomes has been living in. When people talk about the modern era of football, his name usually comes first. He's the quarterback every defense fears and the superstar the league has built an entire marketing machine around. But something happened recently that made even Mahomes stop and look twice. Because Shedeur Sanders just entered a completely different conversation, not just about touchdowns or draft hype, but about global influence, massive partnerships, and the kind of money that can shake the entire sports industry. Reports claim Sanders is connected to a huge international partnership involving the Public Investment Fund, and the numbers being discussed are turning heads across the NFL. And here where things get interesting. Just weeks before this deal exploded across headlines, Mahomes had already made a public comment suggesting young quarterbacks needed to prove it first before getting that level of attention. Now the internet is replaying that clip everywhere and asking one big question. Did Mahomes underestimate what Shedeur Sanders was really building? What makes this entire situation so fascinating is that the conversation didn't begin with a business deal or a partnership announcement. It actually started with a single comment from Patrick Mahomes during a routine media session. At the time, it didn't feel like a huge moment. Reporters were asking the usual questions about the future of the quarterback position. The topic naturally shifted toward the next generation of young quarterbacks entering the league, players with big names, strong college resumes, and massive social media followings. That's when Shedeur Sanders entered the conversation. Mahomes answered calmly, the way he usually does. He talked about how the NFL has a way of sorting things out. He explained that players earn their reputation through performance on the field. And then he made the comment that everyone later focused on. He suggested that young quarterbacks should let their play do the talking first, before the business side starts moving too fast. On the surface, it sounded like normal competitive advice. Veteran players often say things like that. The NFL has always been a league where respect is built through results. But the timing of that comment is what makes the story so interesting now. Because the moment those words were spoken, the internet did what the internet always does. It clipped the moment, saved it, and archived it. Sports media accounts posted the quote. Fans debated what Mahomes meant. Some people defended the comment as simple competitive honesty. Others believed it sounded like a subtle dismissal of a rising star. At the time, though, the conversation didn't explode. It stayed relatively quiet. Most people assumed it was just another example of a veteran quarterback defending the traditional path to respect in the NFL. A few days passed, the sports cycle moved on, and the clip slowly faded from the headlines. But online, it never truly disappeared. Fans kept the video bookmarked. Analysts stored it away in their memory. Social media pages held onto it like a digital receipt waiting for the right moment to resurface. And then that moment arrived. Because when reports started spreading about Sanders, massive global partnership tied to the Public Investment Fund, everything changed overnight. Suddenly, the same comment from Mahomes that once sounded like normal sports talk began circulating again, but this time with a completely different tone attached to it. People weren't replaying the clip just for discussion anymore. They were replaying it to compare 2 moments in time. One, where a rising quarterback was told to prove himself first, and another where that same quarterback had just secured one of the most talked about global sports partnerships in recent memory. And that contrast is exactly why this story has exploded across the football world. Because now the debate isn't just about what Mahomes said. It's about whether the league's biggest superstar might have underestimated how big Shedeur Sanders' influence was about to become. But here's the part many people missed when that comment from Patrick Mahomes first circulated. The conversation around Shedeur Sanders was never just about football in the first place. Long before the headlines about global partnerships started trending, Sanders had already built something very unusual for a young quarterback entering the professional spotlight. Most rookies arrive in the league with talent, potential, and maybe a few endorsement deals waiting if things go well. But Sanders entered the conversation with something much larger already forming around him, a personal brand that stretched far beyond the football field. Part of that visibility came from the massive spotlight surrounding his college career. Every game he played attracted attention. Television ratings jumped. Social media exploded with clips and debates about his performances. Whether people loved him or criticized him, they were watching. And in today's sports world, attention is one of the most valuable currencies an athlete can have. But the attention alone wasn't the entire story. Observers around the league often pointed out the way Sanders carried himself under pressure. Quarterbacks are judged not only by arm strength or passing yards, but also by composure. They must control the rhythm of the offense, command respect in the locker room, and remain calm when the game speeds up around them. Those qualities began showing up early in Sanders' career. Analysts frequently mentioned his poise in high-pressure situations. Teammates spoke about his leadership. Coaches praised his ability to read defenses and manage the tempo of the game. In other words, there was already evidence that his talent wasn't just hype, it translated directly to the field. Still, there were critics. Some people argued that Sanders received extra attention because of the spotlight surrounding him. Others questioned whether his brand was growing faster than his football resume. Those debates are common whenever a young player becomes a major public figure. But what made this situation unique was the scale of interest coming from outside traditional football circles. Marketing experts, global sports investors, and international media outlets had already started watching Sanders closely. And that's where things began to shift. Because when organizations operating on a global level start evaluating athletes, they aren't just studying statistics. They look at cultural influence, audience reach, personality, and long-term growth potential. In Sanders, they saw a player who could potentially check all of those boxes. A quarterback with real talent, a confident leadership presence, and a public image that resonated with fans across multiple markets. So when rumors began circulating that international investors were exploring a partnership involving Sanders, some insiders weren't actually surprised. They believed the groundwork for something like that had already been building quietly for years. But what happened next still managed to shock the entire sports world. Because the deal that eventually surfaced wasn't just another endorsement contract. It was something much bigger, and the organization behind it had already changed the landscape of global sports once before. The moment reports about the partnership tied to Shedeur Sanders began circulating, the entire conversation around his career shifted almost overnight. Because the organization reportedly involved wasn't just another marketing agency or apparel brand. It was the Public Investment Fund, one of the most powerful financial forces currently investing in global sports. And when that name enters a conversation, people start paying attention. The fund has already transformed multiple sports industries in the last few years. It played a central role in launching LIV Golf, a project that completely disrupted the traditional structure of professional golf. It also became the majority owner of Newcastle United, injecting enormous financial power into European football. So when reports surfaced that the same organization was exploring a major partnership with Sanders as part of a long-term American football expansion vision, the sports business world immediately took notice. Because deals connected to the fund are rarely small. These aren't typical endorsement contracts where an athlete promotes a product on social media. The investments tend to be strategic. They're built around long-term influence, global marketing reach, and the future growth of entire sports markets. That's why insiders reacted so strongly when the numbers connected to Sanders' potential partnership began circulating among sports business reporters. According to early reports and speculation, the agreement wasn't just about advertising campaigns. The structure suggested something closer to a long-term commercial partnership, one that could position Sanders as a key face in expanding American football's presence internationally. That's a very different level of involvement than a typical sponsorship. And here what made the timeline so remarkable. Sanders was still early in his professional career when this news broke. Most quarterbacks don't reach that level of global business influence until they've already won championships or established themselves for several years in the league. But the investment groups analyzing Sanders weren't just looking at past achievements. They were studying potential. Global investors often search for athletes who represent more than just statistics. They want personalities who connect with audiences across different cultures, players who attract attention in multiple markets, and figures who can remain relevant for years as their sport continues to grow internationally. When analysts examined Sanders through that lens, they reportedly saw something unique. They saw a quarterback with elite football talent, strong leadership qualities, and a public profile capable of crossing borders. His story, his confidence, and the spotlight surrounding his career created a narrative that international audiences could easily follow. And narratives matter enormously in modern sports marketing. Fans around the world love watching the rise of a new star, especially one whose journey feels authentic rather than manufactured. That's why the moment this partnership became public, the story exploded across the sports world. Because suddenly, the conversation around Sanders wasn't just about football anymore. It was about influence, global investment, and the possibility that a young quarterback might be building one of the most powerful athlete brands the NFL has seen in years. And that's exactly when the internet remembered something. That earlier comment from Mahomes was still out there, waiting to be replayed alongside this new headline. The moment the headlines about Shedeur Sanders and the potential global partnership tied to the public investment fund started trending, something very predictable happened. The internet went digging. In modern sports culture, nothing truly disappears once it's been posted online. Interviews get clipped, quotes get archived, moments get saved by fans who know that someday those clips might become relevant again. And that's exactly what happened here. Within hours of the Sanders deal becoming a major talking point across sports media, the old clip of Patrick Mahomes discussing young quarterbacks started circulating again. At first, the reposts appeared quietly, shared by fan pages and discussion threads. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Soon the clip was everywhere. Sports shows, podcasts, NFL Twitter threads, and even major sports debate programs. Only this time, the context had completely changed. When Mahomes originally made the comment, it sounded like a veteran player protecting the traditional standard of the league. His message was simple. Respect in the NFL should come from performance on the field before the business side of sports starts exploding. That idea made sense at the time. Many former players have said similar things about young athletes entering the spotlight. Football has always valued results, and veterans often emphasize the importance of proving yourself through competition before embracing massive off-field recognition. But when the Sanders partnership news hit, the same quote suddenly looked very different. Instead of sounding like normal competitive advice, some fans interpreted it as a moment where the league's biggest superstar might have underestimated what Sanders was building behind the scenes. and the internet treated the moment like a digital receipt. The two clips began appearing side by side. Mahomes' earlier comment about proving it first, followed immediately by headlines about Sanders securing one of the most talked-about sports partnerships in recent memory. Debates erupted instantly. Some fans defended Mahomes, arguing that his comment was never meant as disrespect. From that perspective, he was simply speaking as a competitor who understands how difficult it is to succeed at the highest level of the NFL. Others saw the situation differently. They believed the clip represented something deeper, a moment where the established generation of quarterbacks briefly misread how quickly the next generation was evolving both on and off the field. But perhaps the most interesting reactions weren't happening in public comment sections. According to insiders around the league, players, agents, and executives were quietly discussing the situation as well. Because beyond the social media debates, the story represented something bigger than a single quote or a single partnership deal. It represented a shift in how modern athletes build influence. The NFL has traditionally valued championships, statistics, and on-field performance above everything else. But today's sports landscape is expanding rapidly into global markets, digital audiences, and international investment opportunities. And that new landscape rewards players who can combine elite performance with cultural impact. Which is exactly why the story kept growing louder. Because now the conversation wasn't just about what Mahomes said. It was about what Sanders might represent for the future of the entire sport. Once the old clip and the new headlines started circulating together, the spotlight inevitably returned to Patrick Mahomes. When you're the face of the league, every word carries weight, and Mahomes knows that better than anyone. He's been navigating microphones, press conferences, and national interviews for years without stepping into unnecessary controversy. So when reporters finally asked him directly about Shedeur Sanders and the massive partnership rumors connected to the public investment fund, people watched very closely. And something interesting happened. If you look carefully at the moment, there's a brief pause before Mahomes begins answering. Not a long one, just enough to suggest he was thinking carefully about how to frame his response. That pause might seem small, but athletes who deal with media pressure understand how important those seconds can be. Because the internet is already comparing every word with what was said before. Mahomes didn't ignore the question, and he didn't double down on the earlier comment either. Instead, he chose a more measured approach. He acknowledged that Sanders clearly has a lot of people who believe in him. He spoke about how the business side of sports can grow quickly when a player builds the right platform around their career. At one point, he even described Sanders' rise as impressive. The tone was respectful and controlled, but it also sounded carefully constructed, like a quarterback managing the clock late in a game, choosing each word with precision so nothing gets misinterpreted. That's part of Mahomes' reputation. He understands that in today's sports world, narratives move faster than ever. One sentence can become a headline within minutes. That's why his response didn't feel like a dramatic reversal. It felt more like a recalibration. He wasn't apologizing, but he was clearly acknowledging that Sanders' trajectory had grown larger than many people initially expected. And honestly, that's not surprising. The NFL is full of examples where young players change the conversation around them almost overnight. One big performance, one major endorsement, or one unexpected opportunity can shift how the entire league views a player. What makes this situation different is the scale of the conversation. We're not just talking about football statistics or rookie highlights anymore. The discussion now includes global investment, international markets, and the possibility that Sanders could become one of the most commercially influential athletes in the sport. Mahomes' response seemed to recognize that shift, without directly admitting that the earlier comment might look different now. And in many ways, that's exactly how veteran superstars handle moments like this. They don't fight the narrative, they manage it. But even with Mahomes taking that careful approach, the story didn't disappear. If anything, it only made people more curious about what comes next, because this situation might represent something bigger than just one quote and one partnership deal. What makes this entire situation so fascinating isn't just the contrast between a comment and a partnership headline. It's the larger shift it represents in how quarterbacks, and athletes in general, are building their influence in modern sports. For most of NFL history, the path to becoming a global superstar followed a familiar formula. First came the on-field dominance, playoff wins, MVP awards, and eventually Super Bowl rings. Only after years of success did the major business opportunities start appearing. That path worked perfectly for someone like Patrick Mahomes. His championships and highlight reel performances made him the face of the league, and the marketing deals followed naturally. It was the traditional model of sports superstardom. But the rise of Shedeur Sanders suggests that the landscape might be evolving faster than many people expected. Today's athletes operate in a completely different environment than players did even a decade ago. Social media allows them to build direct connections with fans around the world. Streaming platforms broadcast their games to global audiences. Personal brands grow in real time as highlights, interviews, and behind-the-scenes moments circulate online. In other words, influence no longer develops only after championships. Sometimes it grows simultaneously with an athlete's career. That's exactly what appears to be happening with Sanders. His football ability is clearly part of the equation. Analysts consistently mention his poise, leadership, and decision-making on the field. But his influence extends beyond traditional statistics. He represents a new type of sports figure, an athlete who commands attention both inside the game and across global media conversations. That combination is incredibly attractive to international investors and marketing strategists. Organizations like the Public Investment Fund aren't simply looking for talented athletes. They're searching for personalities who can carry narratives, draw global audiences, and help expand sports into new markets. And when they analyze someone like Sanders, they see potential that goes far beyond the next season or even the next contract. They see the possibility of a long-term global sports figure. That's why the partnership news sparked so much discussion across the NFL. It wasn't just about the size of the deal, it was about what the deal represented. For decades, the league's biggest stars were almost always the quarterbacks who had already won the most games. But now the conversation is shifting toward players who combine performance with cultural reach, storytelling appeal, and international visibility. Sanders seems to sit right at the intersection of those factors. And when that kind of momentum begins building around a young quarterback, the ripple effects can reach far beyond one player or one team. Because suddenly, the entire league begins asking a new question. If this is what the future of athlete influence looks like, who will be the next player to follow that path? At this point, the story surrounding Shedeur Sanders is no longer just about one partnership or one comment from Patrick Mahomes. It has evolved into something much bigger, a moment where the perception of a young quarterback shifted almost overnight. For months, the conversation around Sanders followed a familiar pattern. Some people praised his talent and leadership. Others questioned whether the attention surrounding him was growing faster than his resume. That debate existed quietly in the background of football discussions. But once the global partnership news connected to the Public Investment Fund began circulating, the tone of that debate changed dramatically. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. Instead of asking whether Sanders deserved the spotlight, people started asking whether the football world had underestimated him. Because when organizations operating on a global scale decide to invest in an athlete, they rarely make that decision lightly. Teams of analysts study market trends, evaluate cultural reach, and examine the long-term influence an athlete could have across multiple regions. Those decisions are built on projections that stretch years into the future. So when Sanders became associated with that level of investment, it signaled something powerful. Global stakeholders believed his influence was still growing, not peaking. And that realization changed how many fans and analysts viewed the earlier comment from Mahomes. What once sounded like a veteran quarterback, reminding young players to prove themselves first now, sounded more like a snapshot of the moment before the entire narrative shifted. Not because Mahomes was wrong about the importance of proving yourself. Every great player understands that standard. But because Sanders appeared to be proving something in a different way. He wasn't just building a football career. He was building an ecosystem around his name, one that included performance, visibility, cultural relevance, and international appeal. That combination is rare. And rare combinations tend to attract attention very quickly. What makes the situation even more interesting is how Sanders handled the entire moment. Through all the headlines, the reposted clips, and the debates across sports media, he didn't publicly respond to the earlier comments at all. No social media posts. No interviews firing back. No attempts to escalate the situation. Instead, he stayed quiet and kept focusing on his career. That silence spoke louder than any response could have. Because in sports, the most effective answer often comes through results rather than words. And right now, the results surrounding Sanders, both on the field and in the business world, are creating a narrative that's becoming impossible to ignore. Which leads to the biggest question, now echoing across the football world. Was this simply a business headline, or the moment when the NFL realized a new kind of superstar had officially arrived? If you want, I can also write the final conclusion, 150-200 words, that drives comments, engagement, and watch time, which is critical for YouTube automation videos. What's happening right now around Shedeur Sanders may actually signal something much larger than one player's success story. It could be a preview of how the NFL itself is evolving in the modern sports economy. For decades, professional football existed mostly within American borders when it came to influence and business opportunities. The league was incredibly popular domestically, but the global sports conversation was usually dominated by soccer, basketball, and international Olympic sports. That dynamic has started to change. Over the last several years, the NFL has made serious efforts to expand its presence internationally. Games in London, Germany, and other international markets have attracted massive audiences. The league understands that the next phase of its growth may depend on building stronger connections with fans outside the United States. And when that expansion happens, certain players naturally become the faces of that movement. Traditionally, those global ambassadors have been established superstars, players who already had championships and MVP awards attached to their names. That's why figures like Patrick Mahomes became such powerful symbols for the league's global brand. But the rise of Sanders suggests that the timeline for global recognition might be accelerating. Because the modern sports world moves faster than it used to. Highlights travel across social media instantly. Interviews reach audiences in dozens of countries within minutes. Athletes build communities of followers who support them not just as players, but as personalities and cultural figures. That kind of connection creates opportunities that didn't exist for earlier generations. International investors, marketing firms, and global media companies now evaluate athletes based on a combination of factors: performance, personality, visibility, and long-term storytelling potential. Sanders checks many of those boxes. His career already carries a compelling narrative, one filled with expectations, scrutiny, and a spotlight that never seems to fade. Fans across different regions are following that journey in real time, watching how he handles pressure, leadership, and the challenges of professional football. Stories like that resonate worldwide. And that's exactly why partnerships involving global investment groups generate so much attention. These organizations aren't just looking for short-term endorsement opportunities. They're searching for athletes whose stories can grow alongside the sport itself. If Sanders continues developing on the field while expanding his influence off it, he could represent a new model for NFL superstardom. A quarterback who doesn't just dominate games, but also shapes the league's identity in a rapidly globalizing sports industry. That possibility is what makes the entire Mahomes-Sanders conversation so compelling, because it may represent a moment where two different eras of athlete influence briefly crossed paths. One built through championships and historic performances, the other emerging through a powerful mix of talent, storytelling, and global visibility. And if that new model continues gaining momentum, the next generation of NFL stars might follow a path that looks very different from the one that came before it. When you look at the full timeline of this story, it becomes clear that this was never just about one comment or one partnership announcement. It's about how quickly narratives can change in the modern sports world. Patrick Mahomes remains one of the greatest players of his era, a champion whose legacy in the league is already secure. But the rise of Shedeur Sanders shows that a new generation of quarterbacks is beginning to shape the conversation in a different way. Instead of responding to criticism or debating headlines, Sanders let the results and the momentum around his name speak for themselves. The reported partnership connected to the Public Investment Fund didn't just create buzz. It forced people across the football world to reconsider how influence, branding, and success are evolving in the NFL. Now the question shifts to the future. Will Sanders turn this momentum into dominance on the field, or will the spotlight create even bigger expectations moving forward? One thing is certain: the conversation around his name is only getting louder, and the entire football world is watching what happens next.